Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be diving deep into Kant, specifically his ideas on self-consciousness.
Big topic.
It is a big one. We're going to be looking at this through the lens of Pierre Keller's book, Kant and the Demands of Self-Consciousness.
It's a good one. It really gets to the heart of a central problem in Kant's thought.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the big problem?
Well, it's this question. How can we reconcile Kant's seemingly subjective starting point, the structure of our own minds,
Right.
with his claims to objective knowledge about the world?
Yeah, that does seem like a really tricky balancing act.
It is. And Keller identifies the key to this reconciliation in Kant's concept of transcendental self-consciousness.
It's transcendental self-consciousness. Okay, before we go any further, I think we need to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
What exactly are we talking about here?
So it's not about knowing your name or your personal history. It's more fundamental than that.
Okay.
Think of it as the awareness that there is a self that is doing the thinking and experiencing an I think that accompanies all our representations.
So it's not about who I am.
Right.
But about the very fact that I am.
Exactly. And Kant argues that this I think isn't personal. It's a universal structure of consciousness.
Huh.
The same for every rational being.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how does this impersonal awareness lead to objective knowledge?
Right.
It still seems like we're trapped inside our own heads.
Yeah, and this is where Keller's analysis gets really insightful. He shows how Kant uses this transcendental self-consciousness to ground the objectivity of our judgments.
So it's not just that we have thoughts and opinions,
Right.
but that we actually make judgments that we believe should be true for everyone.
Precisely. Kant argues that when we make a judgment, we're not just saying how things seem to us,
Right.
but claiming that anyone given the same evidence ought to arrive at the same conclusion.
Okay, now hold on a second. Are we saying that Kant thinks there's like a universal standard of truth out there? That seems like a pretty big claim.
It is a big claim, and Keller shows how Kant builds his argument for it on this very foundation of transcendental self-consciousness.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm still not quite seeing how it all fits together. How do we get from this basic awareness of a self to the possibility of universal truths?
Right. So Kant's argument is complex, but here's the core idea. To make a judgment that claims to be objectively valid, we have to be able to step outside of our own individual perspective.
And that's where transcendental self-consciousness comes in.
Exactly. Because this awareness of the I think is not tied to any particular content of our experience.
Okay.
It allows us to abstract from our personal viewpoints and consider things from a more universal standpoint.
So by recognizing that there's a thinker behind the thoughts,
Yeah.
a self that is separate from the content of those thoughts, we can achieve a kind of objectivity.
Precisely. It allows us to see the world not just as it appears to me, but as it could appear to any rational being.
That's a pretty remarkable claim. It suggests that there's something about the very structure of our minds that makes objective knowledge possible.
And this, according to Keller, is the core thesis of his book. Kant's project hinges on demonstrating how this seemingly subjective starting point can lead to objective claims about the world.
Okay, so we've established that Kant believes this impersonal, I think, is essential for objective judgments. But how does he explain how we actually form those judgments?
Right.
What's the process?
This is where things get even more intricate. So Kant argues that judgment is an active process, not just passively receiving information.
So we're not just sponges soaking up data.
No.
We're actively engaging with the world and making sense of it.
Exactly. And Kant identifies a faculty he calls the understanding.
Okay.
That plays a key role in this process.
The understanding, so is that like common sense street smarts? What are we talking about here?
Not quite. It's more about the mind's ability to synthesize and connect different representations to see how they relate to each other.
So like when we see a bunch of different trees and we can recognize them all as belonging to the category tree.
Yes. And that active categorization of bringing different representations under a single concept is a function of the understanding.
Okay, but how does this relate back to this transcendental self-consciousness we were talking about?
Well, Kant argues that the very possibility of connecting and synthesizing different representations presupposes the unity of consciousness.
You mean the fact that there is a single I
Yes.
that is doing the thinking?
Exactly. Without that unity, there would just be a chaotic stream of disconnected thoughts and perceptions. We wouldn't be able to form coherent judgments or make sense of the world around us.
So in a way, the act of making a judgment is itself an expression of this, I think.
Yeah.
It's the self actively organizing and synthesizing its experiences.
That's a great way to put it. And it highlights how central this seemingly abstract concept of transcendental self-consciousness is to Kant's entire theory of knowledge. Okay, so transcendental self-consciousness, it sounds really complex, and it is a little bit complex, but it's also like incredibly insightful.
Okay, so how do we even start to wrap our heads around this?
Well, Kant actually starts with something deceptively simple. It's the pronoun I.
Oh, okay.
Right. So he argues that, I is much more than just a label for our individual selves. It's not just like me saying, I'm going to go grab a coffee.
So there's something deeper going on there.
Precisely. The I actually points to a universal structure of self-awareness that underlies all human experience. So it's not about you or me as individuals, it's about this shared framework that makes any experience possible in the first place.
So to understand anything, we have to first understand the I that's doing the understanding.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this, it's almost like this foundational layer, right?
Okay.
And Keller even refers to this as like impersonal self-consciousness, which sounds a little contradictory.
Yeah, a little bit.
But the idea is that there's this level of self-awareness that precedes our individual identities.
So there are different levels of self-consciousness.
That's exactly right. So Kant distinguishes between our everyday awareness of ourselves as individuals, like our likes, dislikes, memories, all that stuff.
Right.
That's what he calls empirical self-consciousness.
And then there's this deeper level, the transcendental self-consciousness.
Exactly. That's it. That's the bedrock, the foundation upon which our individual sense of self is built.
Okay.
It's not tied to our specific experiences or memories or anything like that. It's something more fundamental. Keller, actually, he uses this really great example from Kant where he imagines this being that passes awareness of the past from one individual to the next.
Oh, I remember that, like a chain of elastic balls or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's this powerful image that Kant uses to highlight how even our seemingly direct experience of ourselves, of ourself, might be more complex and layered than we actually realize.
So how does this distinction between the empirical self and the transcendental self help us understand the bigger picture of Kant's philosophy? Where does Keller take us from there?
Well, Keller argues that this distinction is key to understanding Kant's overall project, right? He goes on to show how this deeper level of self-consciousness, this transcendental I, shapes our perception of the world, our ability to form judgments, and even our understanding of morality.
So this seemingly abstract concept of transcendental self-consciousness actually has far-reaching implications for how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Keller's book so compelling. He takes these abstract Kantian concepts and he reveals their relevance to our everyday lives and experiences. It's not just some airy-fairy philosophical stuff. It's actually about how we live in the world.
This is already making me rethink some of my own assumptions about consciousness and perception. I'm eager to see where Keller takes us next.
Well, get ready to delve into the heart of Kant's philosophy. Because next, we're going to unpack how this transcendental self-consciousness connects to our ability to make judgments and even to experience the world around us.
I'm all ears. Let's take another deep dive.
Okay, so we've established that there's this, deeper level of self-consciousness, this transcendental I that kind of underpins all of our individual experiences. But how does that connect to something judgment?
It's a great question. And that's where Kant gets really interesting. He argues that judgment isn't just about, stating your preferences. It's about making a claim that something is objectively true, true for anyone, not just for you.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. Kant would say that to even make a judgment like that, you're implicitly appealing to a shared impersonal standpoint. It's almost like you're saying anyone who tastes this pizza, using their reason, would agree that it's delicious.
Oh, okay. So judgment is about moving beyond just our subjective tastes and kind of tapping into something more universal.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there's this shared framework of reason that we all kind of operate within. And this is where that transcendental self-consciousness comes back in. Kant argues that this deeper I is actually what allows us to even make these kinds of objective judgments in the first place.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the connection here. But how does this this idea of a shared standpoint actually work in practice? I mean, people disagree all the time.
Right. Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? But Kant would say that even when we're disagreeing, we're still operating within this shared framework of reason. We're using the same basic tools of logic and understanding, even if we end up reaching different conclusions.
So even when we argue, we're implicitly acknowledging some kind of common ground,
Yep.
like a shared structure of rationality.
Exactly. And that's what makes reasoned debate even possible in the first place. It's why we can have these meaningful conversations about complex issues even when we disagree.
Yeah, okay, so this is making me think about how we approach discussions and debates in a whole new way. It's like there's this underlying potential for understanding, even amidst disagreement. But, going back to Keller, how does he connect all of this back to the book?
Well, Keller really dives deep into this connection between transcendental self-consciousness and judgment. And he shows how it's not just about these abstract philosophical concepts. It's about how we understand the world around us, how we form our beliefs, and even how we interact with each other.
So it's not just heady academic stuff. It actually has real-world implications.
Absolutely. It shapes how we think about truth, objectivity, and even the very possibility of, shared understanding.
This is really blowing my mind. We've gone from the simple pronoun I to these really profound questions about the nature of judgment and objectivity. Is there anything else Keller highlights about judgment in the book?
Yeah, actually, one of the key things Keller points out is how Kant connects judgment to our experience of time and space. Remember how we talked about that unity of self-consciousness?
Right.
Well, Kant argues that there's a corresponding unity to our experience of the world. It all hangs together in this coherent way, and that's not just an accident.
So how do time and space kind of fit into all of this? They seem like, such fundamental aspects of reality.
I know, right? They seem so basic, but Kant argues that even our experience of time and space is actually shaped by the structure of our minds. He says we have what he calls a priori knowledge of space and time. It's not something we learn from experience. It's the framework that makes experience possible in the first place.
So we're not just passively observing time and space. We're actively, shaping them with our minds.
Yeah, in a way, yes. Kant argues that the unity of our experience, the fact that it all kind of makes sense and fits together, depends on this a priori knowledge of space and time. And that, in turn, is grounded in the unity of self-consciousness.
Hold on. You're saying that our experience of time and space is connected to this deeper self-consciousness. How does that even work?
Yeah, I know it's one of Kant's more mind-bending ideas, but Keller does a great job of kind of breaking it down. He points out how Kant actually argues that our experience of time is dependent on our perception of space.
Okay, that sounds a little counterintuitive. Don't we experience time as this flow, a sequence of events? How could that possibly be dependent on space?
Well, Kant's argument is that without objects persisting in space, we wouldn't actually be able to perceive that succession of events that makes up time. Think about it. You need something to change in order to even perceive time passing, right? And that change has to happen in space. It's our minds need these spatial ankles to even make sense of time.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. It's our experience of the world is this, intricate tapestry that's woven together by our minds, and time and space are kind of like the threads that hold it all together.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And Keller really does a fantastic job of guiding us through this intricate tapestry.
So we've talked about the connection between transcendental self-consciousness and judgment, and now we've kind of brought in time and space. Where does Keller go from here?
This is a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, that's the beauty of Keller's book. He takes us on this intellectual journey, step by step through some of the most challenging and rewarding terrain in philosophy. And next, he's going to take us even deeper, I think, by exploring the limits of what we can know about the world and ourselves.
The limits of knowledge. I'm intrigued. Let's keep diving. Okay, so we've kind of explored how this transcendental I, this deeper level of self-consciousness, shapes our ability to make judgments and to even just experience time and space. Well, from there, he goes on to, tackle one of the, I think, biggest questions in philosophy. The limits of, human knowledge.
Okay, now that sounds pretty intense. I always thought, the goal of philosophy was to, gain more knowledge, not figure out what we can't know.
Yeah, that's a pretty common misconception. But, Kant actually argues that, recognizing the limits of what we can know is essential for really understanding, the nature and power of human reason.
So it's not about, giving up on knowledge, but more about being, It's more precise about what kind of knowledge we can actually have.
Exactly. And Keller, he does a really good job, I think, of unpacking Kant's concept of transcendental idealism. So this is where Kant makes a distinction between like things as they appear to us, which he calls phenomena, and things as they are in themselves, the noumena.
Okay, so the phenomenal world is the world we experience, right? It's the world of our senses and, like, perceptions. But then the noumenal world is kind of this hidden reality that lies beyond our grasp.
Yeah, you got it. And Kant argues that we can only have knowledge of phenomena of the world, like as it appears to us. And this is because, our minds actually structure our experience through these, what he calls categories of understanding, like space, time, and causality.
So our minds are almost like, I don't know, lenses that shape how we see the world. But we can never really step outside of those lenses to see things like as they truly are.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Kant argues that this doesn't mean, that we're trapped in some kind of like subjective illusion. It just means we have to be aware of the role our minds play in, shaping how we experience things.
So if we can only really know phenomena, what about the noumenal world? Are we just like completely in the dark about it?
Kant, I don't think, would say we're completely in the dark about it. He, acknowledges that the noumenal realm exists, this realm of things in themselves. But he argues that, like, our cognitive faculties, our minds, basically, they're just not equipped to grasp it directly.
It's a little bit frustrating, like to know there's this whole other dimension of reality that's out there, but we can't, like we're forever barred from like entering it.
Yeah, I can totally understand why you would feel that way. But Kant actually kind of sees this limitation as a source of freedom, because we can't make these definitive claims about, ultimate reality. We're actually free to focus on understanding the phenomenal world, the world that we can know and that we can actually interact with.
Okay, so instead of getting all bogged down in like metaphysical speculation about things we can't possibly know, we should just kind of focus on making sense of the world as we experience it.
Exactly. And that's actually where I think like Kant's ideas have really profound implications for, how we think about science and morality and even just like our place in the universe.
So even though Kant kind of sets these limits on what we can actually know, he's actually like opening up all these other avenues of inquiry and understanding.
That's exactly right. And that's what I think makes Keller's book so exciting. It's not about, shutting down inquiry. It's about like redirecting it towards areas where we can actually make real progress.
Well, this has been a truly mind-bending journey. We've gone from like the simple pronoun I all the way to the like limits of human knowledge and the nature of reality. It's amazing to me how Keller kind of, wove all these different threads of Kant's thought together.
He really has. And
Yeah.
I love how he leaves us with this final thought from Kant, which is like a reminder that even the simplest things in nature hold these like mysteries that defy purely mechanistic explanations. He quotes Kant saying, "It is utterly impossible for human reason to hope to understand the production of even a blade of grass from merely mechanical causes."
That's really beautiful. And it's also really humbling to think about. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn,
Yeah.
There's always deeper mysteries to explore. So even though we might never fully grasp the thing in itself, that noumenal realm, there's still just so much wonder and beauty to be found in the world that we can actually know and experience, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's like the ultimate takeaway from Keller's book. It's an invitation to keep questioning and keep exploring and just kind of marveling at the complexity of, both the world and our own minds.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Kant and the demands of self-consciousness. It's been a challenging but incredibly rewarding exploration.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to all of our listeners out there, we encourage you to check out Keller's book for yourselves and to keep pondering these profound questions that really lie at the heart of what it means to be human. Until next time, keep diving deep.